So he decides about it. Call the meeting to order whenever you're ready. They're recording now, but we can't until David's here, so now we can conduct.
I got Earl from here from Nemo.
Hey, David.
Did you get your paperwork quite a while ago? Yeah. Thanks for coming, David.
Yeah, it's not yet.
I was gonna stop by and see if you got the paperwork.
The monthly,
Yeah, just the
oh yeah, I did, yeah.
meeting agenda stuff.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't know how to turn the camera on. Start video maybe?
Yep.
Okay, there we are.
Wow.
Okay, I did it. I clicked on 3 things and it worked.
Amazing technology.
All right, you, let's do you, and we'll say speaker.
Well, I'm glad you came, David. We need someone with some good ideas.
Half asleep, but we got a quorum. We need
I
to-
don't
We are with 3 of you, I guess.
More intrigued about this thing. Novelty, keep your attention.
Okay, so whenever you're ready. That,
Yep, should we call the order?
Yep.
So. I don't know what we need to do here.
we need to approve the minutes, so,
Yep, that's- Do we have
everything
those here?
discussed, and you need to, ask for a motion.
Approval of the minutes from back in April?
Yeah.
Yep.
Don't think we'll accept the minutes as is.
A second.
Then you need to vote,
All right,
it's 3-0. Okay. Go to the next thing.
So I guess the next thing on the agenda would be a warden update. I don't know, you're gonna bill help with that, Lee, or?
Yeah. We had, Sean Murphy was doing most of our patrols and stuff, whatever, and he's funded right through the PD budget. And he's no longer available. So we've been having officers just every once in a while going out, taking a few hours, go out to check.
Is
It's really quiet. We used to get, I mean, we rely mainly on getting complaints,
All right,
and that's been, it's been so quiet for us. There's not any action at all on that.
Is he not available permanently or it's just temporarily?
I don't know that. We're gonna try to determine that, but yeah.
Okay,
So we don't have, and where he was part-time officer, he had free time, so he was able to go out and do that for us.
Hmm.
So all of the officers are assigned to do that at certain points. Yeah, but this summer has been it's just incredibly busy for both towns. We just haven't had the manpower to go out and do that. So it's been one of those, we just been reacting complaints. I think we had one.
and what was that?
That was over Bartlett's Island, and I don't think we located anybody. They said, I know exactly what it is, get Bartlett's Island around the cove on the right. Up in there.
Yeah.
Trying to think which road you get to it on.
What was the complaint?
Somebody called, said they've had people out there and they didn't think they were allowed.
Someone from the island or saw them from across or?
I'm not sure who
Yep.
made the complaint. Somebody called in and just said that there were claimers out there, didn't think they were allowed. And like, so we never found anybody to check the vehicles. I don't think it would have been a violation if we located anybody who wouldn't quit. But that was one way to figure out what the fines were. But it's been really quiet for us. And like I said, I don't know whether anybody has had any problems, whatever, but they're not making it to us.
no, that's a good thing, not to have a bunch of complaints, but probably kind of reflects on the amount of the resource that's available too, is kind of diminished some.
Did we find out, Claire, who got the licenses? Not to skip here, but who did get the licenses?
Oh, I meant to bring the book, but I forgot. I think we've only sold 2 commercial licenses.
Yep.
If you wanna give me a second, I'll run and get the book.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
because that would be
I'm going to
interesting,
bring that.
because that would be interesting, because if there's only 2 licenses sold, and who's gonna be out there to dig for, just a peck for recreational? If she did give away or 70 recreational licenses.
You know, when I first got involved, with, 4 or 5 years ago. We were out there all the time.
Yeah.
It was the crew coming over from, Searsport and down that way, and they're coming across and they're fishing out there in Bartlett and
Yep,
everything, and that's just completely disappeared. You just don't see it anymore.
yep. It'd be interesting to know who that was, because there's only 2 licenses sold, and I assume that I'm probably one of them.
We were
David's
probably,
one of them.
that's what we used to get most of our complaints. Except unless people out there, Victor would call us and others would call us and everybody else, but a lot of those about somebody else like would come from home, from property owners.
Yep,
And it was during, I don't know, July or August, it was that far back, but
Yeah.
Guessing it was a property owner.
yeah.
Just 2 commercial, Brian and David. That's it so far.
and then recreational,
recreational. Oh, let's see.
You vote?
Recreational, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 residential and 1 non-residential.
maybe. I don't think anybody would probably, like, there's a property owner on by the time.
I don't know. I guess obviously somebody looking at it and get a commercial license is gonna go to an area that has more of a resource. They're
Right.
not gonna waste the time or the money to come into this town and harvest, and they're not gonna get much in return.
Right,
That's the bottom line, they go where the dollar is.
Right. That's the way I read it too. Might have been picnickers or somebody scouting it or something, but.
was there much anything report from like Adam or John, because they were able to get on the boat a lot more, right, this year?
Yeah, and we never heard a word. We knew they were going out every once in a while and going over there. Never got anything, nothing.
Were they able to make it over to that side of the island at all? By boat?
I know they were over there once.
Yep.
But I don't know whether, here again, they kind of function on their own. Sometimes they'll let us know when they're going, but
Yep.
not all the time. I know one day that they did go out to talk to John, but never heard back. So
Is John and Adam, are they, I know they're shellfish wardens, but something about, I think Adam was not a shellfish warden for the town of Mount Desert, but
No, he is.
he is, okay,
Yeah, that's part of his duty.
okay.
All right, good. So then I guess we should move on to the state update.
The annual wood training is scheduled for March 29th and 30th in Belfast, so any of your PD or harbor masters that need their certification, that will be the 2 days. If you have research, they're only required to be there for half a day, one of those days. If you have new folks, they gotta go for both days. And we had our regional meeting back at the beginning of October 11th, I guess it was, down in Machias. We had one, and we had one on the 12th in Belfast. And those were just meetings, opportunities for people to come, give any input that they have, any complaints or any discussion that they might want to give to the department as to how shellfish management is going or how they would like it to go in the future. There is another meeting that's upcoming in November, but it's way down in Brunswick. And the department hopes to make those an annual occurrence at least. So stay tuned for notification about that. I would assume same time next year. There is restructuring happening in the shellfish program. Will no longer be called the shellfish program. We're going to be the nearshore marine resources program to reflect. I didn't do it.
you can say it.
Yes, yes. To reflect
Serious?
the fact that,
Near shore,
yes, nearshore marine resources, to reflect the fact that we don't only deal with shellfish, we deal with everything on the intertidal, basically. And there'll be new staff coming on board to reflect the broader mission of the program. But as far as I understand at this point, my Job duties will not change. I will continue to be an area biologist and working with people for shellfish management, so.
What about
there's maybe
funding?
more people that you can connect with, but I will still be your primary contact for this type of work. So,
Glad to hear it.
yeah, that's my update.
A decrease in staff and funding as well, or?
Yeah, we are getting a new supervisor, a new person coming on board that's gonna be in charge of everybody, and then a couple scientists ones are gonna come on board to do all those other species that we are, like periwinkles and seaweed and mussels and whelks and all that other stuff that we have to do. They're primarily gonna be involved in that.
Losing your boss, I forgot his name. Dennis, is he still?
He will be almost entirely doing permit reviews and not.
Well, he's gonna be out of that department.
He'll be in the program, he'll still be in the program, but he won't be
Right.
primarily responsible for shellfishing.
You getting a new supervisor, should we know his name, or?
It's a woman and her name is Meredith White. I have not met her yet. She won't be on board until November, end of November. So sometime beginning of the year, probably you'll be hearing an introductory information as far as how to contact her and all that. She'll be based out of the Blue Bay office, so. And Dennis isn't going away. He's still available to us. He'll still be in the Lemoyne office, so. But you'll just have more people that you can ask for help.
Was she an internal hire or?
No, outside, she was a research scientist for Moody's. Moocs, yes, Moocs. She has done her research mostly with ocean acidification and oysters and other shellfish, other bivalve shellfish in regards to ocean acidification.
You know about it?
I don't know her, I've met her before, but yeah.
All right, thank you. So I guess that moves us on to old business. So is that where it says an update discussion from Dr. Peterson?
Okay, I've got a couple things. I've got the one that's on the agenda, and then I have another thing I want to show you, but let me I brought a few copies. At least one for the three of you, and I can send one to you for the minutes. So the first thing is, this is the water quality sampling that we've been doing this summer, and so particularly when there have been around rain events, we've been trying to sample. And so we originally were just going to sample at Northwest Cove, which is in Bar Harbor. So I'm chair of the Bar Harbor Committee, among other things. And so, and then after talking to Rusty and Victor, we decided to add Pirates Cove, which is in both of these places are seasonally closed. And so the idea was to get some water quality samples that showed some higher bacteria numbers that we then had a grant to send off and do what's called microbial source tracking. And so when they do the initial counts and it comes up with a high count, they don't know, it could come from the shit of any warm-blooded vertebrate. So it could come from any bird, any mammal, and they can do that pretty cheaply. They can do that in the lab in Lemoyne, and they can go through 100 samples a day or something. I don't know how many they do a bunch. To figure out what particular animal it's from, you have to send samples down to a lab that then does DNA sequencing on them. And without getting into too much detail, just think that, like, even though we've all, like, I've got E. coli and a horse has E. coli and a bird has E. coli, the genetic sequence of those different strains is different. And so the sequence, they call that a library. They compare it to the library and they go, oh, your E. coli DNA matches a goose. And so that's what you've got to deal with, or your DNA matches human, and that's what you've got to deal with.
And is that the enhanced type of testing you were able to?
And so what we've done is we've just been collecting samples, and luckily what EMR does, instead of just guessing and sending some samples down that may not have very high counts, we took enough sample to where they ran half of one, saved the other half. And so when we're done, probably mid next month, we're gonna take the high ones and send those down to New Hampshire.
Figure out what it is.
And then they're gonna come back and say, it's got X, it's got Y, it's got everything or not. And so nothing's gonna probably be known until the end of the year.
Okay.
But this is just, and if you look in Northwest Cove, and so the count limit has to be above an average of 30. Or the P90 or whatever, the rate has to be above 30, and Pirates Cove had 3 that were above that, a little bit. None of them were huge. And Northwest Cove had 1. And so far we've got at least 4 samples that we're gonna send for sure. We might even send them a low sample just to see if they can pick up what the background is on something, to compare it to, because if they say, oh, it's all it's all goose, but the low ones also show goose. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm gonna probably talk, the guy in charge of that lab is a guy named Steve Jones that both Bridie and I have worked with. And so I have a relationship with him, and I know enough biology to where I'll be able to talk to him about what the best strategy is. And so we have a couple $1,000 in our grant to run those samples because they're not cheap. But it's not going to cost the town anything. It's so we just did that as an add-on because it was Pirates Cove and Northwest Cove. It's like a less than a 10-minute drive to get both samples and then take them over to Lemoyne. So it was an easy add-on. And so right now what we have is we have some samples, and we've got some samples from your place that are showing high. We don't have any results yet. They're just sitting in a freezer. And eventually we'll talk to New Hampshire and ship them down there and get some results, and maybe it'll help. Some people report that it's not very helpful. In fact, they go, oh, like it's human and other mammals and birds, and you kind of go that, and if you guys know, so the place that we're sampling is right when you get on Bartlett's Landing Road and you start driving, and just when the water comes through out of that little cove, that's where we're sampling. And we canoed up in there. There's been beaver up in there. I don't think that there's necessarily beaver in there right now. I didn't really see any new sign of beaver, but there's a bunch of houses, right? And there's also geese that come in, and geese are really good at, how geese poop, right? So they're really good at potentially really loading up those levels. And so if I were to guess, I would probably say it's birds would be my guess. And the problem is just telling it's birds doesn't help open it, because what they say is well, just because it's birds, it could still be masking a human problem at some point. And so, but if you do find out it's human, then you can start looking for it. Or if it's a beaver, you could trap out a beaver, so I don't know if it'll ultimately help, but it's not going to hurt. And so I had a student that Grant also paid for a student to help do some of the work this month. And so that's where that's at. And so that's
Were these all big rain events, you said?
we tried to get it so it's a little bit awkward because they want the samples between Monday morning and Wednesday midday. And so it's like if you get a big dump on Thursday, and I don't know if you remember what July was so dry. But we got enough to where there was some rain, sometimes a really big rain, sometimes a short rain. Like I'm gonna probably go out next Tuesday morning, because next Monday it's gonna dump a little bit. I'll go out Tuesday morning, grab a sample right away and take it over.
How shortly after the rain event do they want you to grab this?
It's just up to you. It's kind of like the way it was described to me at times is like when it starts raining, it's kind of like washing your car, and that first water that comes off is the dirty water, and then if it keeps dumping and dumping, then the water gets clean. And so what you really want is you kind of want that early after it starts raining, but not when after an inch has already fallen, because then it's kind of clearing out, right? And so that's what you're trying to time. You're trying to get some rain to where there's good runoff to show you what potentially is there, but not so much to where you're just getting clean rinse water coming down.
Any samples yesterday?
No, I didn't get samples yesterday. Yesterday, what was I doing? Yesterday, I was doing, can I move to the next one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the other thing we've been doing, so the other project I'm involved in is the project that the town's involved in with the park at Otter Creek. And so this is the Stevie Smith wants to blow up the causeway project. And so
They might have some dynamite left over from the next door.
and so this is, so. There's been a lot of concern in Otter Creek for a lot of years about the impact of the causeway. And among other things, there was a clam resource there that, from 71 to 2004, it was closed because the sewage treatment plant was working there. And then what happened is the EPA came in about 2001 to re-license it and realized that their sewage pipe, which was supposed to go half the causeway into the subtidal, was only going halfway down in the intertidal and dumping in the middle of the intercove. And they said that changes the dilution rate, and now with a 1-to-1 dilution rate instead of 1,000-to-1, you guys are not in compliance, and you have to like take it all the way out or ship it. And so what happened in the early 2000s is Mount Desert decided to close that transfer station and pump it over. Okay, so that's one element is there, and so then what that meant is there was no longer that contamination coming in, and so in 2004 that opened up this plant flat again for both Bar Harbor and Mount Desert because the line goes right down the middle. But there hasn't been. It's clear there's not been very good recruitment in Otter Creek for a while in terms of clams. If you go up in there, you'll see some big holes. And in 2004, 2006, some people did a little bit of harvesting, but not for very long and not very much, right? And so it seemed to not, it wasn't a strong place, not certainly the way people talked about it historically, from what their memories were from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, or maybe even more recently. Yeah, no, about that. And so one of the things, and so we have the same problem in Bar Harbor. We've noticed a lot of our flats are going away, and there's lots of potential ideas, ocean acidification, pollution, green crabs, all kinds of things. And Brian Beal at Down East Institute had come up with this way to kind of do some of the testing. Is he makes these 1-by-2 foot boxes. He puts PET screening on either side, and you just stake them in. And what they are is they're kind of like, they're trying to be predator exclusion places. So the clams can come in, but the crabs don't. And so if the green crabs are the problem, you may not have clams outside of the boxes, but you get a ton inside. And so, because if it's ocean acidification, they won't work anywhere. And if it's pollution, they won't work anywhere. And so this is a good way to test for just crabs. So we didn't make up this idea. We kind of went in Bar Harbor, well, we can copy this. Give us a box. We can make things, and so we've made a bunch. And starting in 2017, we started doing this. And what's in that matrix is, so we've been doing it since 2017 in various places. And so 1, 2, 3. This is our 6th year we've been doing it. The first year, for a while, we were just putting out netting. And then we moved over to the boxes because they were an easier way to do. And the nets, when the nets rip, then you get crabs in, and the boxes are a little bit better.
When the nets were working properly, were they?
The first year so if you look at 2017, it's a little hard to see that number. It's 1822. So underneath the net in the first year, we had per square foot 1,800 little clams. It was when you looked at the net that year. And underneath it, the texture was just so different it was just solid worms and clams underneath that net. And we've never seen anything quite like that. It was just unbelievable.
Live mud, yeah.
That cool. 1 year, it was so successful. And on the y-axis is the sites we've used. So on the left is the sites. The first 3 sites, Thomas Island, so that's between Thomas Island and the Twinnies. Hadley Point and Hulls Cove, we just started this year. And then we have a couple over in Blue Hill Bay, on Western Bay, at a place called Windaway, which is up by the KOA, almost at the head of the island. And then at Clark's Cove. And then we've been doing a little bit in Otter Cove, and we've been doing it on the Bar Harbor side, but it's relevant. This is the most relevant one to you guys. And then what I did is, these are just the averages per square foot per box. But what I did is I kind of, just to make it easy to just visualize, I color coded them. Where like red is the worst, yellow, it's like lights, yellow is okay, green is good, and purple, which is my favorite color, means the highest. And so if you just squint at this, what you see is like the upper bay has been the best. That's where the purple is, but it's kind of going to green and yellow.
Mm.
And Western Bay is kind of going more towards red, and Otter Cove isn't so hot.
That's-
And the one thing we did this year because of this causeway issue is I put some boxes just on the south side of the causeway, right next to, not quite at the old Fisherman's Lane there, but right real near there. And they actually had, many more clams than the ones in the upper bay. We had one up really high, and I think I got 3 clams in like 5 boxes, and these guys averaged like 70 clams per box. And so there might be something to it that causeway is keeping some clams from coming in. It might be nice to next year, maybe do 2 or 3 sites within Otter Cove. And, and these are all on our side but I'd be happy to collaborate with you guys if there's a couple places where you want to put a few boxes and check this out.
You're right.
And what I do is I have a marine biology class in the fall. And most of the time they show up and help with counting. And so, because this has been about 4 or 5 days of work. So this was some work to get these numbers. But and so what you can see is that this year, the other thing you can see is that some years are really good. Like, let's see, 2019 was a pretty good year for most sites. It's like their highest numbers for just about every place for that year. 2020, the first year of the pandemic, my students just said, yeah, it's the pandemic year, everything sucks. So everything was down, but if you look at this year, it's down like 2020 was again. And so, and Heidi and I were talking about it in Machias the other week, and we're not seeing, like, I don't know, when you're out in the flats, I'm not seeing a lot of clam recruitment right now in places. And we'll see, Joe Parada has some over in in Upper Frenchman Bay. And so we'll see that he gives to Brian. Brian takes a while to get to him, but it'll be interesting to see if the rest of the state is also showing these low things. One thing that was interesting was on the Upper Frenchman Bay, the clams were all different sizes. And so there were some really tiny ones and some, so they were spawning all summer. The ones down in Otter Creek were all like pretty reasonable size, not an inch, but not too far off. And so they were like one June, July spawning event. One larval group came in and floated in, but it's a different larval group than it's in the Upper Frenchman Bay, like above the porcupines. And so this is just kind of what we're doing. The other thing we're noticing, or I'm noticing this year, I had more green crabs that still got into the little clam condos than ever before. So they're almost becoming little green crab condos now.
Are they small?
All over the place, but yeah, a lot of small ones. Because they have to come in as larvae too. So
That's what I was gonna say. They're coming
everybody
in,
has to
yeah.
come in as a larvae, and the idea is that the clams come in, but the crabs don't. But if the crabs come in, like it's, yeah,
When did you install
late May, early June, late May, sometime in May. And usually, yeah, we try to let the crabs try to reproduce first and happen. And so if you do it too early, you're really hitting the crab recruitment period. And we actually put ours in later than Brian does.
I was gonna say, I would have expected since you installed them a little bit later.
Yeah, but we get less, and this year we got more. Like the crab numbers, you can see, like at Hulls Cove, they average 20 crabs per box. That's a lot of little crabs in every box.
And how does that compare to when you're using the nets?
The nets either are really good or they're not good at all, right? Because all you have to do, as soon as the net pops up or it rips a little bit, you're gone. Or if there are a couple in there when they're in the mud when you put it in.
Not to like beat the point around, but like, is there a transition from nets to boxes showing in the data?
No, not really, no. And
Which-
there was a year or two, so 17 was just nets. 18 was both. 19, I think starting 19, it's all boxes. I think so.
So do we feel that there might be some more data that might be helpful since we aren't doing any of these box programs, if we were to participate in Otter Cove or something?
it would be easy. One of the things that, so Brian goes out and he puts like 15 of these boxes in the site or 30 boxes in the site. He just like has these huge numbers. And then he has to have really big grants in order to do it. I found that if I put 3 to 5 boxes in a place, or if I put 5 and a couple get ripped up and I have 3, the numbers are pretty consistent. Like I may not be able to do the most rigorous statistical test, but if they're consistent between each other, where like if you showed me the results from a box or two, I'd go, oh, that's from Hulls Cove. I know, because this is Hulls Cove is one that had all the crabs and none of the razor clams. And so, I don't think you need to overkill it.
That location, but another location within Mount Desert for our own.
Oh, yeah,
that we-
totally. Like it would be easy to like say, let's add 20 boxes to Mount Desert, and you tell me 4 places where we want to put them or something, like at least one in Otter Cove, another one here or there. We could totally do that next year.
Is it data just for the sake of data, or does it point us in a direction?
Well, it's one of the things it tells you is what the cause of the clam, fall is, right? So we didn't, like, people had all kinds of ideas, like, people knew that up around like Thomas Island, it was dead mud. And lots of people had lots of different ideas of why it was dead mud. Some people said it's because they're dragging too much. Some people said it was because it's polluted. Some people said it was because of green crabs. So, some people might say it's because it's overfished or something. And so so this helps you at least limit that. What it tells you to do next is like the question. To me, what it says is it's like, this is tough. Because the only way to get past this, do you really think that there's a viable industry? If you switch over to like a town can lease up to 25% of its intertidal to let people put nets out. And so people could kind of go do their own kind of like intertidal aquaculture. That seems to me to be such a huge change in the way clammers clam that I don't really see personally. This is just me speaking. Heidi wouldn't say this, even I don't know if she believes it or not. But for me personally, I don't see that as a very viable option. Among other things, it's also like you're taking up that ground. There's wormers who want to go in there. What are they going to do when they hit your net? And so, you being able to monopolize that place, and if you're trying to put it in a place that you can't always get to, and you're sitting there trying to raise something, that's really going to focus attention for a poacher to come in. I mean, there's a lot of potential issues there that I'm not saying they're not solvable, but I don't see that as a particularly viable option personally to make that work better.
I think David agrees.
No comment.
Yeah, and so to me, that's kind of the way I see that one. So I'm not sure what it helps you see. But one of the things you realize though is that there's places, especially up higher, or if you're in a really gravelly place, the crabs I think are much less able to get clams in those spots. And if you go to a place like the Gonk over in what's that, in Sullivan, it consistently gets clams and people consistently harvest. And it's not like it doesn't have green crabs, but boy, it just keeps on. People keep on pulling out bushels every year. And so I think part of it is like, if you get the right soil, if you get the right bottom consistency, the clams can get in there and avoid the green crabs. And so it gives them a little bit of protection. But if you're in a really muddy, straight out place, it can be really tough for those clams. And so I think what's going to happen is the places we're going to be able to get clams. And then the other thing we're doing now is, especially in Blue Hill Bay, which is you guys too, and us, there's a lot of cohogs out there.
Yeah.
And we had many more of our harvesters. Hadley Point used to be where all the rec guys would harvest. Almost all of our everybody at Hadley Point this year that we saw was getting mussels. And people that were harvesting clams were in cohogs at Northwest Cove, or in the times when it was open, or at Clark's Cove. And then they were getting oysters too, because we've got oysters.
At Hallie's Point too, oysters.
Nothing over in French. The cohogs and oysters pretty much stopped at the causeway. It's wild. Frenchman Bay, I think, is deeper and a little bit colder. And that plus the history of aquaculture, it just means that when you, like we did censuses of both oysters and quahogs over in Western Bay, up through Trenton a little bit, and then down, not into Mount Desert, but all the way to Northwest Cove. The oysters are more focused in Clark's Cove, although they're a little bit everywhere. The quahogs were all through there. And talking to people, the closed areas up in Jordan River, there's tons of oysters up in there. You go over to Surrey, Patton, that bay, tons of oysters, tons of quahogs. And so I think that one of the things going to happen is that there's going to be a little more emphasis on harvesting quahogs. And we've added them to our ordinance, but we haven't set any regs. And so right now, anybody can go there and it's like a state resource. So we're not limiting anybody to do it. And we do have some out of town commercial harvesters that come in and harvest quahogs. And we have rec harvesters that come in and they don't need a license. We find that they don't know the regs on non-steamer species worth a damn. They
They're just taking everything.
Or they're saying everything's 2 inches, like a client's 4 inches. And so they're, and a quahog is an inch hinge, but that works out. 2 inches gets you there. But they're just, they're not aware. And like with oysters, we're a little bit worried about it because oysters, you have to keep a little colder. You can't, everybody's eating them raw, or a lot of people are. And if you're treating them like you're treating a steamer on a hot day, there's a real potential for some health problems too. So we're trying to figure out how to make that education part possible. We're not quite sure how yet, but that's the very long explanation of what we're trying to work on.
It's interesting how the rec people are already recognizing a different resource, kind of moving away from the soft shell clam or the little neck or whatever you want to call it, the steamer. Interesting.
What eats the larvae of the green crab and the clams?
There's everything will eat their larvae. They're just everything will, anything filters will get them.
Right.
And green crabs, they're vulnerable to lots of things. Other crabs, bigger versions of themselves, fish, that kind of stuff. There's been a lot of people have been trying to figure out what you can do with them harvesting other than composting them, right? Because if you could find a real product that's worth more money than compost, then maybe you could start, because you can certainly get a bunch. You put out some crab traps, you get green crabs. And so the question is there any market that can get enough money? And various people have proposed things. I haven't seen anything that's been successful yet. If it ever does though, there's, that'll be great. And if you can, you're not going to get rid of them, obviously, but if you can knock them down by harvesting them, that would be awesome. But so far, it's just there's nothing out there that's close enough to make it worth anybody's time to go harvest them. They could be doing other harvests.
Well, and we talked about this at the Frenchman Bay, the regional meeting, that there's some research that shows that the adult crabs are actually one of the primary predators on the juvenile crabs. So if you trap out the adults.
They had a West Coast study where they took a bay and they trapped out all the adults and came back, and they had more crabs the next year than in the bay where they did.
Well, that's thanks a lot for sharing that, Chris. I think that's a great program. Any more data possible? And thanks for sharing, including us in that. That was really cool.
Yeah, and we'll be in touch, and next spring we'll think about we'll come back and see if there's like a couple places where we want to add stuff in. So the project to try to figure out to assess the health of Otter Creek that the town and the park is. So I'm one of the two consulting scientists on that with Hannah Weber at Scudic. And our job is, this is a community science project. And so we're not driving the bus. It's like, we're the GPS. It's like, you tell us that you want to go to B and we'll give you possible ways to get there. So that's kind of our job. And so we're not the researchers per se. We're kind of going, you want to test the contamination? Here's Maine DEP. Here's Angie Brewer's contact. We've talked to her. She's willing to do this with you. Here's one way to get there.
You're not gathering the dynamite. You're just going to recommend how much.
Yeah. Well, we'll tell them what engineer to talk to tell you how much.
Is there any of the data that points towards the causeway being the problem?
Well, the only one there is if you look, Brian, at that bottom, so this is the first year we did the causeway. So if you look at the far right bottom,
Mhm.
in Upper Otter Cove, we averaged 0.4 clams per box. And below the causeway, we averaged 57. And if you look at, let's see, I haven't looked at the green crabs. So for otter, there are equal numbers of crabs in those boxes in both places. And I didn't really see a lot of broken shells, and so it looked more to me like it was just there, but that's just like 2 dots on a map, right? And so it may be that if you have 2 more dots inside Otter Cove, that they're more variable, right? So you don't know that there's a causeway between them. And it's consistent with the idea that the causeway is screwing things up. But you want more data before you like stick your neck out on it. And so to me, like one of the things to do would be to put 1 or 2 more. We had one other site there that we're not using anymore, mostly because, so it's down just north of the causeway on the northeast side. And the mud there is so, it's hilarious mud. It's just that you get stuck in there so bad, so fast that
Not
well,
supposed
we
to
were worried we were gonna lose some students, like a couple, they just said, please just never use this site again. And so, but there's other places we could go and put some and see if there's consistencies,
Yep.
you know, on there. And so that'd be a fun thing to do, especially to try some on the Mount Desert side.
Yeah,
Would be
I think that would be great to try for
Yeah.
sure.
And we're happy to help coordinate that.
When, Steve, you gonna blow up the causeway?
You know,
Somebody gives you.
don't know. We're actually gonna have it in sometime in November. We're gonna have another meeting at the Aid Society. And last time we had about 30, 40 people come to talk about it. And then we're gonna tell them kind of what we've learned so far. And I'll make sure that all that gets to you
Yeah,
guys. So
cool.
if you want to come and listen and
Yeah.
hear what we have to say to talk about, I'm happy to, yeah, it'd be great to have you come.
Yeah.
And so that'll be, and then we're looking to them, the one thing in the process I'm not sure about, like the community is the driver. And to me, I don't know if that means the consensus of the people in Otter Creek, or if it's like the sustainability committee, which is Phil and Derlin, taking that advice and them being the drivers. So I'm not quite sure what community is community.
Yeah, I hadn't really engaged with the whole thing because I was kind of letting it grow some legs to see which way it was gonna walk.
Community, and so the question is like, so to me, we're giving it back to community. But one of the questions I've been asking people is like, who is community here? I mean, I know it's the town of Mount Desert, but I don't think we've quite thought that one through yet about who makes that decision and who's moving that forward.
Great.
And you guys could be part of that community that moves that forward.
Yeah, that's something to
That would be
consider,
good.
right, David? All right.
It's got a lot of history down there. That place also has a history of just, I was the one that noticed it. It just has a massive influx of acidity from all the oak leaves that float down the stream, and that's not good product for the
Yeah.
plants to grow on, because it's just, the mud's terribly acidic,
Might be that crazy mud that Chris was
Which
talking
one?
about.
It does have more leaf litter than any other site.
which would explain why you have a less of a survival rate above the bridge.
Yeah.
I've always found that problem all the years I've harvested it, that mud just won't allow plants to survive on.
There's some interesting pictures of the causeway before the causeway was built. There was a lot of rock hard bottom before.
There was a gravel bar that went out of that, where the causeway is, there was a gravel bar that went about 2/3 of the way out.
Yeah.
39,
Yeah.
so this is, you don't know the history of this causeway? So in the mid-30s,
There we go.
Rockefeller, when a lot of the people in Otter Creek had already started to leave fishing and start working for estates and stuff, you know, flowers, other kinds of things. And then in the late 30s, JD Rockefeller came in, bought up a lot of the farmers. Because there was a lot of farmland up there, not the woods that it is now. Bought it up, and then pulled it all together and gave it to the park. And so kind of like took the communities and kind of like turned them into the park. The guys thought a lot of the guys, there were a lot of fish houses, probably a good dozen fish houses. That, a lot of people thought they had handshakes with Rockefeller on keeping their fish houses. Those didn't transfer. to
There was
the
a
park.
wooden bridge, right? Like a wooden causeway
They-
post.
there were 2 or 3 wooden bridges, but you know, Otter Creek is not a great harbor, right? You get a south thing coming in and just, I've had students surfing in Otter Creek.
Wow.
And so at least 2 bridges got totaled, got wiped out.
So
And
the wooden post bridges would allow more flow than what.
But then they
ended up.
went. They went.
Right, they
So
got,
it's-
right, they allow a lot of flow.
They got knocked out, and then the other thing, so Rockefeller, when he built the causeway, those arches, if you go underneath them. They've got a couple of grooves. Because the other idea Rockefeller has is you could put planks in,
Oh, yeah, seal it off.
and it was gonna seal it off and turn the upper inner Otter Cove into a swimming pond. And what that would allow, it would allow a place for the community of Otter Creek to go swimming. Because then they wouldn't go down to Seal Harbor Beach and go swimming there. And so it was a way to keep the hoi polloi out of Seal.
I've
Harbor.
heard they end up
And it was-
forfeiting
They
the,
never put those planks in, they never did it, but that was part of the reason that access is so small. Is
yeah,
that the access was designed to be able to be blocked off, even though they never pulled that one off.
it is small. You go through in a small whaler and that's all you
It's
want.
all you want to do, yeah.
Pretty
And so,
interesting.
and so as you can imagine, the town of Otter Creek does not have the best relationship with the park in terms of, they kind of feel like they got, and if you look at a map, Otter Creek is the one community that is completely surrounded by park. If there's green all the way around it, and so, you know.
So it seems like there might be a lot of mud in there that wasn't there once upon a time by the way the photographs look. So it has changed a lot.
And that's one of the things that we've suggested is let's pull the photographs together, because
You know, there's a bunch in the fish shack down there.
are there?
Yeah, on the wall, and I don't know if they should stay there because of weather, or, you know,
They just
actually,
need to get picked, yeah. they
I
need to
took
get
pictures of a
photographed.
bunch of them.
Because what they would do is they'd bring in schooners to those old quarry sites. So Hall actually started this quarry in Otter Creek. And so he had the quarry up in there, and the schooner would come in, and then at high tide, it would ground. And then they load it up, and then they float it out. At low tide it would ground, and then they float it out at high tide after they loaded it up.
I don't know if the blowing up of the causeway would make clams ever appear there again or not, though, but.
Well, the thing we do know is that a lot's changed since 39, right? I mean, there are pictures of guys going in with like little trident spears, intertidal fishing, and coming up with strings of flounder. And we know you can't do that anymore.
But other places, not just Otter Cove.
Yeah,
so-
right, but you know, and so if you're trying to get that passed back, I think
That's kind of the way I feel about it. It's kind of like,
It's not clear to me how much it's gonna change, and that's one of the questions to ask, that we're asking the community is. What do you imagine happening if we got rid of the causeway? What's your vision of what that community could be? And I don't know that we've heard that yet.
Yeah, that's
other than
int-
they want that passed back.
Who is it that owns the fish shack now?
The Fish Shack is I think it's the Aid Society maybe owns it officially, or, it's where traditionally Stevie's been the one that's been most involved in it, but I think it actually might be. I don't think it's the town, I think it's.
It might be the town.
It might be the town, but I think that the group that takes care of it is the Otter Creek Aid Society.
cool. Well, I think we should move on to new business before we get too hungry and eat the erasers off our pencils. And that would be a report and discussion from Dr. Bridie McGreevy.
Fine.
No, that's great, Chris. All of that. Yeah, I really didn't want to stop you and I didn't want to step on your, so I was learning and enjoying the adventure. But I think we should hear what Dr. McGreevy has to say. Go ahead.
Well, thanks for the invite. I don't have a formal report necessarily, or any real objectives for a presentation, but I was interested in continuing the conversation that we had a few weeks ago at this point, and just sharing some of what we've been doing with the Maine Shellfish Learning Network, and supporting any kind of like discussion or brainstorming this group might want to have around conservation activities, which I think we've been doing. So with that, I'll just share some of these resources that I brought that I'll refer to That's it. So Maine Shellfish Handbook, and then some project profiles.
Thanks for
I
coming.
do have some a few extra materials here if anybody
Thanks, Lee.
wants some of these.
Thank you, Lee.
Actually,
And I'll describe those in just a minute or so. But yeah, so I'm coming from an organization called the Maine Shellfish Learning Network. The acronym is MSLN. And we've been supporting shellfish programs, really focusing on learning, trying to create resources like these, share information across the different programs, because over the course of a number of years of working with shellfish programs, we really identified a need for these kinds of resources. A lot of this learning actually came out of our engagements right here in Frenchman Bay. I've been working with the Frenchman Bay Regional Shellfish Committee for many years, and then increasingly, connecting. Chris and I have been working together for I don't even know how long. It's been a while. We're connecting with Bar Harbor and Poolsboro, and then building out from there, and across all these different programs. We're just noticing all of the many different things that these programs are trying to do, whether it's the seeding and the netting, different kinds of predator mitigation, monitoring, surveying. There's some communities that are doing some really interesting, like educational events, cultural events, lots of different approaches to water quality monitoring. I have a couple of profiles here that provide more information about the microbial source tracking that Chris was describing. And in doing these different kinds of activities, running into the same kinds of challenges, in many cases, like, reinventing the wheel. And so we thought, okay, well, what can we do? What could we help provide to fill some of those gaps and help create some of these connections across these communities? So one of our major foci has become this commitment to learning. But also in doing this work, we have recognized many of the kinds of equity issues that clammers and clamming communities are bumping up against. We hear from clammers that, the sense that they're on the front lines of climate change, and already really figuring out what do we do in this situation. But then in terms of like the social justice issues, and I think the Rockefeller story points to like how intense that has been here, this pattern of gentrification, loss of coastal access. We see this happening all across the coast. We have a couple of different initiatives that we're trying to support in addressing that issue and having coast-wide conversations about coastal access. So we've been really trying to focus on these kinds of equity issues, paying attention to inequities in the kinds of resources that are available. We're really in favor of and excited about the investment of resources in the Nearshore Marine Resources Program, of having new staff, because there are some structural inequities within DMR where the marine science program has received a lot of attention and support for science. And so to see this coming online for the shellfish programs and the other intertidal programs, I think addresses that at a structural level. And some inequities in representation, and there's a lot that I could say about this and how that plays out in terms of like having an advocacy organization for shellfishing communities, or at a legislative level. We've been really paying attention to representation in inequities and disparities in news media and media representations. My team just did some informal research, just comparing news stories focused on the wild clam and mussel fishery as compared to aquaculture and the lobster fishery. And especially between the wild clam and mussel fishery and aquaculture, it's like a night and day difference in the kinds of stories that are being told. Where with the clam fishery, it's, as you can probably guess, gloom and doom. It's dead, dying, disappearing. You get these terms like last clamor standing and that kind of thing. And then aquaculture is held up as like the wave of the future, right? The solution to all of our problems. And that's not to say that, there isn't a truth to those stories, but that it's too black and white and it doesn't fit what's actually happening on the ground. And so we've been trying to tell different kinds of stories, ones that are more equitable and inclusive and diverse, and that also celebrate the ways in which clammers are showing up and leading all kinds of different conservation and adaptation efforts. So we started doing this several years ago with a project that we called Clam Cam, which David was an early innovator for us on that. I remember one day, David, back when we were still using those microphones, sticking them in the ears, and you know, we had some troubleshooting that we had to do, but it is what it sounds like. It's we worked with clammers and they work cameras, and we documented you know, where they were digging, how they were digging, the rhythms of it. I think, Brian, you were involved in this in connecting the Clam Cam with a bigger story that we had with Bangor Metro, and we see Vic online there, he supported that as well. And this was a collaborative project, and so we created this Clam Cam website that had, I think, like 18 digging episodes from across the coast, brought it back to clammers and said, how does this look to you? And we heard largely that it fit clamming. It showed what clamming was like, gave a sense of it, but it didn't go far enough because it didn't connect with the context in which clamming occurs, the shellfish management program, and the kinds of issues and scientific information that's needed there. So over the last couple of years, we built out from Clam Cam to create a website that we call the Mudflat. It's just themudflat.org that links to Clam Cam, but where we've really exploded the content, and where, you know, a lot of these kinds of resources live. You'll see when you look at the Maine Shellfish Handbook, which is basically like a soup to nuts of everything that you might need to know to start a shellfish program. Many of our media efforts and some of the research efforts that I've been leading with my team have helped shape the content there. We also, as part of the Mudflat development, had a parallel effort that Chris was really involved in. Vic was on the science advisory committee for this Maine Shellfish Restoration and Resilience Fund, which was supported by Broadreach. This fund is no longer available, unfortunately, but DMR, it just announced that they're going to have a fund available in 2023 that we're hoping is going to be kind of like a replacement fund. It's not at the same scale yet as the Maine Shellfish Restoration and Resilience Fund, but there are going to be some replacement funds available. But this MSRF provided small seed grants ranging from $1,000 to $20,000 to support about 40 projects from, I think, as far south as Freeport all the way to Sabayak, doing many things that we were talking about. So the surveying and monitoring projects that were doing predator mitigation, shellfish restoration, actually creating upwellers to grow clams to then be able to see out onto the flats, doing some of the cultural events, getting kids involved in the fishery, and then lots of different water quality approaches. So those project profiles are intended to just let other people know what's going on in these programs. And the ones that I provided in the packet there, just want to highlight a few that I think might help generate some ideas about things that you might want to try, or even more importantly, people that you might connect with who would be inclined to share their experiences and support the kind of work that you guys might want to do here. So the first one in there is Damascata. So this is led by the Damascata Newcastle Shellfish Program, where they've taken a really interesting approach, doing something similar to what Chris is doing, for connecting with the Darling Marine Center. So bringing the force of student labor to bear on this really effortful monitoring and surveying effort, but doing so in such a way that they can create a longer term sense of the trends there, which is really crucial. So they're doing this over time, but they're also combining it with harvester interviews to say, what have you noticed about changes in clam populations over time? So some great innovations going on there. Then I included two from within Frenshman Bay Borough and the Frenshman Bay Regional Shellfish Committee. I like to say that those programs have been throwing the kitchen sink at conservation. We've been on a number of views, Chris has as well, of just trying a whole range of different things and learning and adapting over time, getting to the point where both programs now are doing pretty advanced conservation work, a mix of activities. Woodsboro has a shellfish resilience lab where they're buying clam seed, but then growing it out and receiving the flats and doing some other things focused on climate adaptation and coastal access. And then the last one is Thomaston, I think.
Yes.
And they're again, so David Taylor he's a very enthusiastic leader and eager to connect with other programs. He's been doing a range of things, but they have had like an increasingly focused and effective approach to addressing water quality issues there that has resulted in opening large amounts of flats. So combining microbial source tracking with tidal modeling, with innovative partnerships with state agencies, and his contact information is on there as well. So those are just some things I wanted to highlight. And I only have one copy of this, but this was put out by Tidal Bay Consulting, Manomet, and GP Cog through the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group. They actually did a survey of all the shellfish programs in Casco Bay, asking them, what are you doing for conservation? And just provided this really great summary of, you know, different things that you could do for pollution source identification, community engagement, outreach, kind of like a recipe book almost for conservation. So I'll leave that with you, Russ.
Great, yeah, thank you.
That's of use or interest. I think that covers it. Yeah, just open it up for questions or.
Do a lot of these areas have access issues?
They do, yeah. Yeah, and we have a profile that is focusing on access, highlighting some of the work that's been going on in Lubec, where Amanda Lyons is a key leader trying to raise awareness about some of the access issues that they have there, which is it's definitely tied to gentrification. It's become, and this is anecdotal, but the sense is that it's become worse during the pandemic as people are moving to further flowing places like Lubec. And then there was also an initiative, the Cobscook Bay Shores group, that was securing access and building trails and then creating some problems in terms of clamor access. And we're planning to convene a coast-wide conversation around access probably in late January or February, try and connect across some of these different efforts, because there's also some work that the same group, the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group, Manomet, that they've been doing in Casco Bay as well. So yeah, access is very much pervasive.
Yeah, maybe if you could keep me posted if that meeting comes together in January, February about shore access stuff. Victor and I in the past have tried to keep a pulse of that type of thing.
Totally.
When Acadia National Park was talking about some intertidal regulation, we were trying to at least be participating to hear what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Vic and I have talked a lot about how coastal access is playing out around here and ways to communicate about that with the landowners who are contributing to the problem. We're also planning to convene a panel for the Shellfish Focus Day, which is held the first week of March at the Samoset in Rockport. It's going to be, I think it's Thursday, March 2nd, whatever that Thursday is. And so that panel is going to focus on access as well. And we're looking for participants who might want to join that. So if you wanted to become involved in the conversation at that level,
That'd be great.
follow up about that.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the term clam sandwiches. Was that you that mentioned about the?
So that's a Brian Deal thing. Are you in the loop on? Are either of you in the loop on the clam sandwiches? That
I think that's something Joe brought
Joe,
and
right.
really involved in.
You heard of these
Yeah.
clam sandwiches, David?
Yeah.
All right.
my understanding is that so one of the challenges with growing out clams is that after they get to a certain size, they need to be in the mud to keep their shells together. They just open up and dissolve and turn into a goopy mess.
Right.
So these clam sandwiches, and I don't know exactly what they look like, but I've heard that they're like these cages that essentially compress the clams and they sink them to the bottom, I believe. So that the clams can continue to grow out. And I imagine they must be spring loaded or something.
No, they're just, I think it's just a tight net. It's just a
Okay.
net without much of a side on it, right?
Is the idea to have harvestable or is it to augment spawning capability?
That's for spawning, yeah.
Larger clams, so where are they brought in from another location and put as a full-size clam?
I don't know what they're doing there. I'll have to ask Joe about that. And that probably digging them from a closure or something.
There's been a variety of ideas tossed around about how to do that, but I think at this point, because of regulation, the idea of taking it from a closed area was tossed around, but you can't
Right,
move
yeah.
adult clams from a closed area.
Makes sense.
So they were
then move to like just digging adult clams from open areas and putting them in these clam sandwiches and sinking them and creating like spawning sanctuaries, basically. With those.
Because I'd love to see, at the minimum, I'd love to see something to try to enhance, like, even for wreck diggers in the town of Mount Desert, like. Something, you know, I'd like, just like to swing the bat and try something to say we did, and if there's success or there's a opportunity for the. Half dozen or more people, maybe if there was more, you know, if those few people find that there is clams, if we had success, maybe we'd sell 15, you know, maybe we'd sell double the licenses. Just trying to. You have any ideas about? That, David, about how we might have a clam in Mount Desert before they're all gone?
Yeah, I just don't have the nice loose mud that some other places have. Most of our mud here is just rocky substrate,
Which is not favorable, is what, yeah,
not for that type.
yeah,
You know, I've done plenty of clam reseeding in my life on my own, just taking your big adult 4 clams and poking a half
Right,
a bushels up
right.
there.
I know,
Worked fine long before climate change started, but
but not so well anymore, it doesn't seem.
not so well anymore.
So not to skip the record, but like,
No.
and like jump to different species, but like. Are there, is it allowed, or are there any programs that do any hard shell clam seeding, or? You know, to just looking at habitats we have and just try to think to have
Yep.
some type of resources.
Yeah.
Is there something like that?
You've got perfect habitat, you know, hard shell clams, which is why they've done so well in this area.
Yeah.
Be something to think about.
They're very easy. Even your father tried to squirt them around the harbor, and then there's a few cohogs in the harbor now because of this little seeding program. But they're very easy to transplant. They seed really well. They seed, as far as I'm concerned, they seed in that area. That's just my opinion. They don't seem to float like your soft shell clams. They'll spread out inside of the area where the adult clam is.
Yeah, because I'd hate to ignore, you know, the steamer, but it just seems like,
If you put a bushel of large cohogs down in Patrick Cove down here, I think you'd find within 3 years, you have a lot of clams. They do well, and they are literally impervious to green crabs.
yeah,
Green crabs rarely do the damage to them, even at a young stage.
and then to get on the pie in the sky, you know, more filter feeders would be higher, potentially better water quality with lack of any filter feeders. I mean, I don't even if they weren't, I don't know, that just sounds like, I would hate to change some of the areas that have been traditionally for soft shell clams, but if there's no resource there, it would be interesting to see a resource available in some of our.
Well, you know, Sergeant Cove, inside of Sergeant Cove, there's got some reasonably super mud. It's surprising how it's just never come back.
So mussels are similar, mussels are susceptible to green crabs too, so the cohogs and
They just don't seem to go after the mussels. They
the
really,
green crab.
they don't care. When I've watched, like in some coves at night, you know, with a million green crabs on the mud at 2 a.m. Thereafter, unbelievably, I watched them as a study. They were 100% attacking sand shrimp. They weren't after clams. 100% of them were attacking sand shrimp.
Well, whatever's on the menu that particular part of the season.
Yeah,
I
I
would
mean,
say. What's your thoughts on that, Chris? Like, I mean, would that be something that, would we be like looking the wrong direction if we were to?
I think that, I think that cohogs, they're more of a southern species, and so we're at the northern end of their range here. But I think over in Blue Hill Bay,
We were, and we might.
might be at, right? And so, I still don't see them as being successful over in Frenchman Bay, but your flats aren't in Frenchman Bay, they're over here more. And so doing something with cohogs, it makes certain sense. I'll say the varieties thing. The other thing is that in addition to just working really hard on private landowners, one group that's been surprising to me is land trusts like Maine Coast Heritage Trust have really gotten behind shore access for fishermen. Which is not what you might expect Maine Coast Heritage Trust to be about, but they've actually been really strong proponents, and I've literally had calls from Maine Coast Heritage Trust staff asking, this property has come up, would it be good access? Because we could potentially buy it and save it for access. Which is the exact opposite of what's happening in Lubec, where the land trust there is doing the opposite. It's until the particular guy that runs that land trust is no longer running it, I don't think that's gonna change, honestly.
I would put quotation marks around land trust.
Right, I would too.
I don't think it's really a
Oh,
land trust.
It's a nonprofit.
It's a one guy.
It's a one guy nonprofit with a lot of money.
That is
And
good to
it's-
hear. That's good to hear with Maine Coast Heritage Trust, because I can't think of like, anything more hands-on for the next generation, the young generation, to have like the adults be able to bring the kids, not casting a line fishing, but in the mud and have something, get something maybe for dinner. And that started half the reason I'm sitting up here, inspire the next group. And that's kind of what scares me, to lose our access to these resources, is to lose the people with the hands-on or the wanting to. I mean, I know that's pie in the sky, but
And the other thing, not to switch species too much, but over on the Bagadoos, where Bailey Bowden did a lot of work with the alewife runs there, the main partner there was Siona, who's a Maine Coast Heritage Trust staff. She was the one that went and got all the money for those projects. And so they're involved in that kind of work too. And so, so and I think Misha's really been involved in Seal Cove Pond.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of work around here from Maine Coast Heritage Trust on a lot of local natural resource issues, which has been really they've been a good partner to have.
They
that's
actually put in boat ramps in the back.
wow.
Help fishermen have better access. I mean, they took their own properties and invested in boat ramps, which, I mean, I don't know any other lands that's doing that.
Someone's forward thinking. I mean, be inclusive to all groups, and everybody told their own weight if they have half a mind to.
Well, over 50 years I've been a clam digger, I consider myself having 100% record on stewardship of the land I use. And, a few summers back, there was a lightning strike on Thomas Island, and I immediately, all I had with me was a pack bucket. And I got that fire out before it decided to eat that island. And immediately kind of went home and called Maine Coast Heritage Trust and told them, I'm always keeping an eye. I've used this island for 40 years of my life, and I had an opportunity to pay it back because it did try to burn once back in the.
That reminds me, that's another great point, is that I think harvesters are kind of definitely not even kind of our canaries in the coal mine for seeing a lot of these things. And, these are all reasons to not give up on some of this stuff and try to inject some type of new type of interest or maintain some type of something to it.
And highlight the positive stories too, like the stories of stewardship, the successes that some groups are having. And this is one of the things we want to do on this panel, like not just bemoan the challenges of access, but here are some places where people are actually making progress and being proactive, not just trying to maintain access, but one of the things that the Maine Coast Heritage Trust does really well is they're forward thinking to say, where could access be opened up? How can we proactively purchase these properties, develop the trail access, and think ahead on this? So it's not just scrambling.
What have you seen for the primary complaint of landowners or these so-called land trusts like in Lubec that are starting to limit the access? What are their complaints as to why they want to limit it?
I can answer that one.
Definitely not.
I've had 3 bad issues with landowners the last couple of years. Every one of them involved there thought that they owned the low water mark. And I had to send 2 people to Troy Dow, personally give them the number so that they could explain that, yeah, you may own the low water mark, but you don't have right over fish and fowl. And one lady just had to have it ran in her head a couple of times before she realized that, I can't, she even said that to Troy. She said, you mean I can't stop him from digging in front of my house? I mean, that's terrible. So you gotta get to the landowners. They once they buy that piece of property, they think they own it right to the low water mark.
think education's.
The education is a big, really big one. It's gotta, it would do a lot of good.
Are people mostly complaining because they don't want to see it down there, or they
They
think
don't
that
want you
people are
touching their resource.
littering?
They don't want you harvesting what they recreationally have been harvesting since they got there. They think they own it. They literally think they own it.
I think that's right, that a big part of this is this intense sense of property ownership and territorialization. I also think that, there's this imagined sense of what Maine should be like, of a coastline that doesn't have people. in it.
Oh, you're
Like,
bullseye.
separation of the nature and
Exactly.
like swimmers or any fisherman out and the glass are out in the water messes up the view, so it folds into this aesthetic value. I think sometimes it's a misperception, other times it's straight up bias, right? Biases against people who work in the mud
Mhm.
and wanting to, close that out.
I think Victor has a question, Brian.
All right,
Can you hear us now?
Yep.
We can.
I just, before I forgot, I wanted to mention that thing at Bartlett's to ask Heidi about the bag down there. It says toxic shellfish dump or whatever. See if she knew anything about it, just to remind you before I forget.
There's ropes at Bartlett's Landing that says toxic shellfish, like very big lettering, like so. And do we know anything about this study?
That's disturbing.
Yeah, it's,
Okay, yeah, toxic shellfish testing, yeah, that's the biotoxin programs. Because the muscle resource is so low, and that's what when they're doing biotoxin testing for red tide, they use mussels, or they use clams sometimes too, but they use mussels mostly. And because muscle resource is so low now, they have to put these lobster crates, lobster traps out. They put the mussels in there themselves, and they don't want somebody coming along and taking them out because that's what they're testing. They're using those mussels to test for
Guinea
biotoxin.
pigs.
did you hear that, Victor?
Yeah, well, I figured that's what they were doing. It was about the worst spot. It's like putting a radioactive milk testing stand up with neon letters right next to somebody's dairy farm, kind of, but
I'll pass that along because I think you're right. I think probably a less visible spot would be better.
it's obnoxious. I figured it was intentional to be putting it there. It was really ridiculous.
I'll pass that along. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us of that, Victor. Well, I think that's a pretty good summary of it here. Well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And maybe if these landowners, private landowners are so concerned about the amounts of clams in front of their property, they should come to the meetings and help us figure out a way to enhance the resource.
It's terrible that they buy that property and you think they'd be joyful of seeing what they came here to see, the clamor, the lobstermen and everything. That's what you came to Maine for. So it really irks me as a clam digger when that happens. One lady I ran into, I said, "Jesus, this is why you moved here?"
And I think it is a matter of.
Is that not trying to hurt?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, not in my backyard.
Yeah, and it is a matter of the education and making those kinds of social connections. And it's the flip side of gentrification. Like if you can connect with people, once they get here and show up and have a lot of time on their hands, put them in service to, these kinds of efforts, they can really be great volunteers, but
It's
they'll take that
surprising.
intervention and there's a serendipity to it, you can't always plan for it in advance.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure it's doing a
surprising.
great job with that,
Yeah.
as far as landowner relations and turning that relationship around, because they were having the same kind of problems with the landowners, like did not want harvesters in front of their properties.
Yeah.
And they have really worked hard to change that relationship, and now some of those same people are the biggest supporters of the shelter.
Yeah, the tougher the nut to crack, the more of an ardent supporter you can,
You convince them
yeah.
that this is a good thing, but it takes that work, those events that Roddy talked about. those
Well,
things.
That's what it was, because early on, when they started planning this, they thought, well, let's have a community meeting about this. Before they had done any kind of
Yeah.
relationship building, and we talked through other kinds of strategies, and they decided to go with just having a clam tasting. And then having a community event out on the mud flat and inviting all the landowners and having conversations out on the flats. With no real agenda aside from, here's what we're up to, and this is why we're doing it, and here's how you can become involved. And I think it really has transformed the conversation in that time.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive,
Yeah.
because I went, they were early on, they had a public meeting about their shellfish lab, about where to site their shellfish lab.
Yeah.
And people came out and were dead set against it, they didn't want it anywhere near, they didn't want people parking next to their houses, they didn't, like, none of it, and
Yeah.
now, 3 years later, you know, they're having these clam tasting events with 40 and 50 people showing up, like, oh, we love our clammers. Which,
Jesus.
yeah.
You gotta move different town, David, or we've got some work to do.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. We have some work to do. Well, I think we will adjourn.
In motion,
What can we do?
second.
You were there.
Second. Very good.
Is it 6:20?
You're still awake, Jake? Well,
Next meeting?
yeah, when do you